welcome back to our discussion with Dave Robau. He's founder of Gulf Coast Energy Network. He's the CEO and chief scientist of National Energy USA, and I think you'll enjoy this conversation. Now, one of your day jobs is serving as the chief scientist and chief executive officer of National Energy USA. Will you please tell us a little bit about National Energy USA and your technology?
Yeah, sometimes I forget, especially this time of year, that I actually have a day job that actually pays me, and responsibilities and staff and different things like that. So I mentioned briefly about my ventures into garbage with the project that we did at Hurlburt, turning garbage into electricity using plasma gasification. The undersecretary at the time, Mr. Terry Yonkers, he nicknamed me his garbologist. So I've been the garbologist ever since. And I guess it was maybe like 2016 when we had so much interest, a spotlight literally on Hurlburt Field, which is kind of a lot of people don't really know that installation because it's next to Eglin Air Force Base, which is massive. So Hurlburt doesn't get a lot of the spotlight. But we had an article published in the New York Times, and I got interviewed talking about, how do we handle garbage and all this other stuff. So, by the way, if you ever want to advertise, the best thing you can do is put money into the New York Times. I'm not exaggerating. I would turn my phone on because, unplugged it. Turn my phone on, voicemail box was full. I'd be answering voicemails. The next day, boom, same thing. I had people from, I'm embarrassed to say, countries that I had never heard of. You know where Benin is? I found out Benin is in West Africa. Fun fact. But we had so much interest in the technology because garbage is a global problem, right? We went from, the United States is the world's largest producer of garbage, but it's an issue all around the world. So anyway, I guess it was 2016. I got bit by the entrepreneurial bug.
Oh, wow.
And I left my cushy Air Force job, much to my wife's dismay. And I left all that behind, and I jumped into entrepreneurship, and I started National Energy. So the goal was really focused around two things. My nemesis in life, landfills, putting landfills out of business. Landfills, if you don't know, are one of the most destructive things that our society does, not just to the planet, but to our life support system. They can effectively pollute the air, land, and water all at the same time. And there's really only two kinds of landfills, in my opinion. Landfills that leak toxic leachates down into drinking water supplies, and brand new landfills. Those are the only two types of landfills. So we formed National Energy as a way to do a couple things at the same time. Number one, reduce our dependence on solid waste landfills. Number two, recover as much of that material to put back into the circular economy. And the third one was one that a lot of people don't think about, but about half of what you throw into the bin, like my house, your house, we have this magic vortex, right? That when we put things in it, we come back from work, they've disappeared. It's amazing, right? We call it a garbage can.
Yeah.
So about half of what goes into that garbage can are materials that can be converted, into energy, using different types of technology. So we saw this as an opportunity to also tackle this other issue, and that is, the emissions associated with burning of fossil fuels. If we could take this organic material and put it into an anaerobic digester, produce renewable natural gas, and reduce the dependency on that natural resource, we felt like we can solve a number of different problems simultaneously. So apparently the Air Force agreed because they've given us 2 contracts. So we are well on our way to solving this issue. And now we're working with some commercial customers in kind of in your backyard, which I can't necessarily talk about here. But suffice to say that I think a lot of people are now realizing that landfills are very, very destructive. They're expensive to build, own, and operate. People don't want them in their backyards. So what's happening is landfills are getting bigger and more centralized. So I'm from New York, where I grew up in Brooklyn. The garbage in New York City, believe it or not, goes as far as Ohio and South Carolina. So, I mean, it's just there's no more room in New York. So they just ship their garbage all around the country. So of course, lots of carbon emissions associated with that. And then putting the material in a landfill where it's just going to decompose and release methane into the environment, we felt like this was an area where, we can make a difference.
Well, in addition to your role as CEO, I know that you're also, excuse me, I notice you're also the chief scientist. And I've always been fascinated by that because we've had breakfast and lunch together many times and talked. Yeah. Can you talk about your role as chief scientist?
Yeah, that's my favorite role. I'll be honest with you. CEO is a bureaucratic title that I'm looking to kind of push off to somebody else that knows how to run a company. I'm a scientist, as I mentioned earlier. Scientists are problem solvers, and that's a lot of what I'm focused on. Somebody's got to take the company reins. So for now, that's me. But for me, it's really about sitting down with the customer, understanding what their concerns are, getting a sense for what's in the art of the possible, as we like to say. What would you be open to? Because a lot of what we do is we try and identify, we reverse engineer from the solution back to the problem. And what we do is, using first principles thinking, we try and identify what are the potential roadblocks. Like, why are you stuck here? Is it because you have a $36 tip fee, like City of Orlando? Like things like that. What are the barriers why aren't there vendors in here looking to solve your challenge? Because what we do through a partnership with one of the big Wall Street banks is we provide our service as a service. So what I mean by that is we come in with a technological solution that the customer has an expense. Let's just say it's a couple of $1 million a year that they're spending just to move their waste from their transfer station to the landfill. Well, if you took that and you committed that on a 10-year contract and you awarded it to a vendor like National Energy, we can use that and we can go out and we can secure financing where we bring the solution to you. So we own, operate, we call it a D-boom. We design, build, own, operate, and maintain it. So it's our system. The customer is benefiting from the service because typically they went from 30% landfill diversion to about 80% landfill diversion, and they're effectively paying a little bit less than they're paying now. So as a scientist, I like to get down into the numbers. I like to sit with the customer and understand, okay, where are your goals? The commercial customer that I mentioned has made a commitment to zero waste to landfill by 2030. So we dig in deep, me and my fellow garbage nerds, and we try and figure out, okay, how do we get there? How do we reverse engineer from, that end result to where you are right now?
One of the things I've always been impressed of is your involvement with all types of energy. You're on the advisory board for the Florida Solar Energy Center. Is there much interaction between the research that you do and the research that FSEC does?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of people don't realize how beneficial that organization actually is, because it's not just a bunch of academics and professors, right? They have really grown that. Jim Fenton and his crew have really done an amazing job. I've only been a part of that for a handful of years, let's say. But when I go to those meetings down in Cocoa and I look across the room and I'm just kind of like, wow, they got some really like heavy hitters in this room. I think that's where I met Chris Castro. Kelly Smith Burke, who was the director here at the Energy Office in Florida, and not just those folks, but people that come from the commercial sector. So Publix is represented, and you got these big named brands in Florida that are all sitting around the room, collaborating to try and solve some common problems. And the utilities are involved. I mean, they've just really done an amazing job of putting the right people in the room, really focused and dedicated to solving problems. And I was very humbled, to be asked to sit on the board, and I love it. I always get something out of those meetings. I think the last board meeting that we had, Universal Studios gave a presentation about some of their sustainability and resiliency goals. So you always learn a lot, and we're able to contribute and different things like that. So I think I'm the only person from the panhandle of Florida. So I feel an obligation to represent my community.
Yeah. You and I were talking beforehand a little bit about we're helping sponsor and speaking at a decarbonization conference that's going to be later this year. And ASHRAE, AIA, IFMA, BOMA, and APA are helping to sponsor it. I'm seeing a lot more emphasis on the term decarbonization rather than energy efficiency, emissions reduction, sustainability. Are you seeing the same type of thing? And do you think it really makes a difference?
Yes, I am. I'll give you a little bit of context. So, like I said, I go back several years, right? I'm kind of OG. I was doing this. I was doing sustainability before sustainability was cool.
Okay.
So in the beginning, it was really all focused around conservation, and I think the central thinking was we need to have an ROI. So if I can replace this inefficient with this efficient and have an ROI, I can justify making this conversion, whatever it might be. So lighting obviously was the low-hanging fruit, and then mechanical systems. So it was really all about kind of the building system, the building technologies, insulation, building envelope improvements, those kinds of things. And then I think after a while, a couple of things happened. Back then, I was an early adopter with solar. I've had solar on my house for 15 years. The wattage on my panels this is how old it is. They're 250 watt modules. And now we're installing like 600 watt modules, right? So the efficiencies have gone up considerably. I think over the last decade, what we've seen is grid parity, meaning the cost of solar is now cost competitive with the cost of power, coming out of the grid. So technology has increased. And then we also have some different financing tools that we didn't have before, because now, you can do a long-term contract with solar because you have some confidence on the efficiencies. So I feel that two things happen. That's kind of the first one. The second one is this climate crisis, which, those of us that have been in this industry for a long time, especially with a scientific background, like none of us really questioned it. We were kind of like, the scientific community is in 97% consensus. Like, this is happening. Now the question is, why is it happening and what can we do? So I think this last decade was really focused around decarbonization, because what's happening is the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere is reaching unsustainable levels, and you can't just turn the dial back. So I think what I've seen is what you're seeing too, is the focus on decarbonization. And I think technology certainly plays a role there, but there's a lot of policy things that can and should be done. I always say, I'm a scientist, not a politician, but I wish that politicians wouldn't pretend to be scientists either. I think,
amen.
Yeah. So I've definitely seen that. I can tell you this: where there is consensus, whether you wear a blue jersey or a red jersey, where there is consensus is on job creation and the green economy and those types of things. So what we're seeing across the country is a lot of the kind of Rust Belt states are now getting massive investments in battery technology manufacturing and just all kinds of things. And so we've gone from kind of that blue collar worker who was on the Ford assembly line to now kind of like a green collar worker who's building next generation battery technology. So yeah, I've definitely seen it. I've seen it from the fuels side as well. And I think maybe the third thing that is finally happening is corporate America has started to implement ESG goals and different things around becoming more sustainable, because in the manufacturing sector, pollution has a cost, right? It's an inefficiency. So when you look at companies like Toyota that have implemented their Kaizen, their lean principles and different things like that, they try and eliminate waste because that's an expense. So if you can reduce waste, i.e. pollution, there's a benefit, to the company. It makes the company more financially viable. So decarbonization is super, super important. I've seen that quite a bit. I think one of the tracks at the Power Up Expo is kind of looking at that. And then the other thing that I'm seeing is companies are looking to be more resilient. So I was on a panel, we talked about conferences, I was on a panel with a gentleman from Walmart, and we were talking about energy resiliency. And the question was, how much does it cost Walmart to lose power for an hour? And I don't remember the number, but this guy was like $8,740, like boom, like on the spot. He knew the number because, it's a for-profit enterprise and they understand the benefit of resiliency and having backup generators and stuff like that. So I was just kind of fascinated. I was like, that's pretty good, because I was in my Air Force capacity and I was like, don't ask me that question.
You had mentioned at Power Up Conference, you always like to have a session or a portion looking at the future. What do you think the future of energy holds for us?
Oh man, that's always a great question. So we had a speaker last year, I think it was last year, from NASA. Okay. And NASA was looking at space-based solar. I remember reading the guy's abstract and I was like, what?
I remember that speaker.
Yeah. But, it was interesting because he was really out there. But when he explained it and he explained, the issues that we have, with cloud cover and different things like that, it was kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. One area in particular that the Air Force has us looking at is sustainable aviation fuel.
Okay.
So that's one of those technologies that, I'll be honest, is really in an R&D phase right now. There's maybe like a handful of companies that are really dedicated to it. Big companies, though, companies like Shell and some of the big oil companies. I think they're seeing the writing on the wall, and they're like, hey, we're going to have to change from an oil company to like an energy company. So they're broadening their portfolio and they're looking at alternative fuels and different things like that. In my Air Force capacity, which I hark back on quite a bit, we were looking at creating an algae-based fuel. Okay. Because it was really, for us, it was a carbon sequestration project. We were using that to grow different strands of algae to extract triglycerides and create a biofuel. That's always kind of an interesting topic. The other one that I think is kind of right around the bend is what we call Vita X. So you have an electric vehicle, which is basically just a battery on wheels, right? My first electric car was a hybrid. It was a Toyota Prius. Toyota Prius, if you've ever been in one, is basically a Toyota Corolla with $8,000 worth of batteries, right? And that is a bare bones kind of car. Yeah. But what I noticed is I went on Amazon one year and I bought a little $70 bidirectional unit where I plugged it in to my car, and Hurricane Dennis came through and knocked out power. And I was able to be the hero of the neighborhood because not only did I plug in my refrigerator to my car, but I was charging my neighbor's cell phones and laptops and stuff like that. So vehicle to grid, vehicle to load, we call it Vita X, all of these different things. When you gang up a few of these electric vehicles, now you can create some energy resiliency around that. So there's quite a bit happening in the EV space. The one that I'm really interested in personally is hydrogen. Hydrogen. So the joke around the patch is, regardless of when you ask me, hydrogen is 10 years out. So if we have a conversation 8 years from now, it's another 10 years. But I really think there's companies like Fuel Cell Energy that have really cracked the code. And we're working with them because, as you know, as I mentioned earlier, if you break garbage down, the organic material in garbage, you can create biomethane. Well, if you take biomethane, you can put it in a fuel cell and create hydrogen. So green hydrogen is, the new kind of buzzword. And I can usually tell when the bandwagon is getting full when I look around and I see utilities on the bandwagon. I'm like, okay, so now they're finally getting it, so the memo is out. All the utilities in Florida are kind of jumping all over themselves to do hydrogen projects. So so those are some areas where I think we're going to see, quite a bit. And hopefully, garbage, hopefully we start to see the relevance of garbage as a renewable source of energy. Because I'll say one more thing about garbage. And you know me, I'm a big renewable energy guy, so I'm not saying this knocking technologies like wind and solar, but we know that those are intermittent sources. So like today is a rainy day in Florida, my solar panels probably aren't going to produce a whole lot. So the military, you can't run an installation based on what the weather's doing. Well, we were going to defend the homeland, but today's a cloudy day, so we're just going to take the day off. Can't do that. What I really like about technologies like geothermal, which is really of interest. I've had geothermal in my house for 12 years now, so I can speak the benefits to it. But geothermal, hydro, which some people have opinions about that, and biomass, all those technologies are both renewable, and you can meet base load power. So like a facility that's utilizing biomass has a 95% uptime. So now you can run a mission on that. The other thing that I'll say about biomass is it's the most versatile. You can create an electrical demand, a thermal load. You can convert it to RNG, and in the future, you'll be able to convert it into a sustainable aviation fuel. So those are probably the 4 areas that I'm seeing, just kind of looking around the corner on kind of what's happening.
Dave, it's always such a treat to just spend time with you. I walk away thinking, wow, he's covering a lot of ground. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks. I love the opportunity. Yeah.